10 March 1945, Tokyo. A maelstrom of fire engulfs this capital city as U.S. bombers successfully carry out their first ever low-altitude incendiary bombing of the heart of the Japanese Empire. Major General Curtis LeMay and his bomber crews have reduced a quarter of Tokyo to ashes, thanks to an innovative change of tactics. Over the past months, LeMay has been looking for ways to improve the effectiveness of American bombers in the Pacific. The precision bombing of specific strategic targets was disappointing at best, and the High Command demanded more strikes against Japan. The success of the 11 December incendiary bombing of Hankow, China, suggested to LeMay that the technique might be used with equal effectiveness in Japan. Incendiary bombs require less accuracy and do more damage than conventional bombs. The British and the Germans embraced this strategy earlier with devastating effect in Europe, but the Americans, unwilling to deliberately attack innocent civilians, have persisted in targeting only strategic military sites. LeMay tested his idea in February with high-altitude bombings of Tokyo and her sister city of Kobe. Using only incendiary bombs, LeMay's B-29s destroyed a significant number of factories in Kobe and roughly 1 square mile of Tokyo. But high-altitude bombings in daylight are problematic. Visibility makes it easier for Japanese fighter planes to pursue and harass the superforts. Japanese defenses are less effective at night, so LeMay orders another bombing run on Tokyo, this time at night and at low altitudes to get below the cloud ceiling. The general judges the risk from Japanese anti-aircraft guns to be acceptable. The B-29s were stripped of their machine guns, ammunition, and extra personnel to allow them to carry heavier bomb loads. 343 of the bombers take off from the Marianas and head to Tokyo. Within a few short hours, the B-29s rain a devastating hail of fire, terror, and death on Tokyo, taking the Japanese completely by surprise. Napalm-filled bombs ignite a 16-square-mile area of Tokyo that is 4 times more densely populated than most American cities. The flames quickly engulf the traditional Japanese wood and paper homes. The Tokyo Fire Department, poorly equipped and undermanned, cannot begin to respond. A stiff wind, estimated later to be 55 miles an hour, whips the flames into immense firestorms of up to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Superheated vapors advance ahead of the flames, sucking up oxygen and spreading carbon monoxide along with unimaginable heat. Death comes quickly and in several ways: incineration, suffocation, and trampling by stampeding crowds of civilians. Afterwards, official U.S. estimates put the death toll at more than 83,000 Japanese, with about 41,000 injured and 267,000 structures destroyed. Other sources claim even higher figures, perhaps as many as 120,000 Japanese killed and more than 1 million people left homeless. In contrast, of the striking force responsible, only 14 bombers are lost. It is a dramatic and successful change in U.S. tactics. Very quickly, LeMay plans more attacks. He now has what he believes is the blueprint for a blazing defeat for the Empire of the Rising Sun. 12 March 1945, Koblenz. For the doomed Germans west of the Rhine River, the wolves are scratching at the door. The sound is distinctly similar to that of American tank engines, and it's coming from every direction. General Dwight Eisenhower, commander of the Allied forces, knows the Rhine is the last major barrier between his armies and Der Fuhrer's doorstep. As he prepares to send his troops across, he is perplexed by the deployment of enemy forces. Instead of pulling back to the east side of the river, where they might make a more formidable defense against the Allied advance, the Germans hold stubbornly to their emplacements west of the river. Whatever their reasons, Ike is determined to exploit their stupidity. Waffen-SS General Paul Heuser, the man charged with defending the area, would agree with Eisenhower's assessment, but there is little he can do about it. He has pleaded with Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt to be allowed to withdraw and defend the far bank of the Rhine, but to no avail. Retreat, von Rundstedt tells him, is not allowed. Heuser is resigned to his fate. He knows Rundstedt is merely parroting Hitler's insane edict, but that won't make it any easier for him to hold the line against the American 3rd and 7th Armies. He is all too aware his position is weak, and he knows the Allies know it too. General George Patton sees the German line has been stretched to the breaking point and concludes he can plow through it immediately. To the south, General Alexander Patch takes a more cautious approach, choosing to wait for more supplies and better integration of his troops. Both Patton and his direct superior, Omar Bradley, are perfectly happy to get the Third Army off to a head start. Both are chafing to begin clearing the Germans from the region, and both have their eyes on the Rhine. They hope to get across it before their rival, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, launches his assault to the north. Despite the depleted state of the German army, the road to the Rhine is forbidding. Scrambling German units have already reduced muddy roadways to slop, and the steep, wooded hills have restricted Patton to narrow fronts. The scattered pockets of enemy troops fight desperately, but ultimately can offer only token resistance, as Patton's men throw down pontoon bridges on the Moselle River near Koblenz. The Third Army's 12 Corps rumbles southward to the Nahe River, as 20 Corps smashes through the Siegfried Line and swings eastward. For a few days, the weather clears, allowing Allied fighter bombers to fill the spring skies with ordnance, pounding the Germans from above while the land assault intensifies. By the time the 7th Army begins its thrust from the south on 15 March, the Wehrmacht is battered and on the run. The enemy's problem is there is nowhere to run. The logical path across the Rhine is forbidden. The Germans are trapped. The roads are littered with their dead and with smoldering heaps of metal, and still the U.S. Army Air Corps rains fire and death on them from above, unchecked. By now, Hitler has removed Rundstedt as Western Front commander and appointed Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. Kesselring's first general order to his field commanders drips with hidden meaning. They are to hold their positions, he says, but they must avoid encirclement. Of course, the only way for them to avoid encirclement is to run like hell. The very same day, 17 March, Ike meets with his generals and gives Patton the go-ahead to push his army as fast as it will go, squeezing the Germans against the approaching 7th Army. The Third Army moves through the German countryside like a green tornado, crushing everything in its path. Within days, most of the German forces still west of the Rhine are encircled and annihilated. The Third Army alone captures or kills 113,000 enemy soldiers. According to Allied estimates, the two German armies defending the Rhine have lost 75 to 80% of their infantry. Patton is now on the west bank of the Great River, dipping his toes in the water, as his ally to the north, Field Marshal Montgomery, prepares to leap across. 16 March 1945, the Philippines. The ruined but newly liberated city of Manila struggles back to life. But General Shitsuo Yokoyama's Shimbu group still controls vital water supplies in the rugged foothills of the Sierra Madre Mountains northeast of the city. American forces, already stretched to the limit, now must secure both the Wawa and Ipoh dams, even as they continue mopping up operations on the southern coast of Luzon. General Douglas MacArthur's continuing campaigns in the southern islands have further depleted U.S. strength around the capital. But 6th Army Commander General Walter Kruger must play the hand he has been dealt. On 12 March, he launches an attack toward the Wawa Dam from the Marikina Valley, pushing north and east against the Shimbu defense. The rough terrain is pitted with natural caves that the Japanese have craftily camouflaged and connected by tunnels. The best efforts of American air and artillery assets inflict little damage on this deadly honeycomb of hidden machine gun nests and artillery emplacements. GIs on the ground must run a terrifying gauntlet of fire and steel as they move from bunker to bunker with hand grenades and flamethrowers. The 6th Division gains a foothold on the lower ridge of Mount Parkawagan just west of the Wawa, but their right flank can make no headway against the enemy's firepower on Mount Mataba. Unable to hold the line, the division gives up the ground they have just taken in order to mass their strength across a narrower front. The strategy pays off in a driving advance that forces a wedge into the Shimbu Line, critically weakening its left flank. The slow and methodical attack absorbs the town of Antipolo, an important anchor of General Yokoyama's supply route, and deepens the salient threatening to split the Shimbu front. Casualties are heavy on both sides. Japanese totals are greater, due in part to a disastrous counteroffensive that dissolves almost as soon as it begins under the weight of American air and artillery strikes. Japanese units lose contact with one another and order disintegrates rapidly. The assault is so disorganized, the Americans don't even recognize that they are being attacked. U.S. officers describe the Shimbu Group's intermittent actions as pockets of persistent infiltration by small units, never suspecting it is a single, coordinated offensive. General Yokoyama finally calls off the countering move in disgust after sustaining heavy losses. By 16 March, the 6th Army has turned Yokoyama's left flank far enough to clear an approach through the Bosa Bosa Valley northward to the Wawa Dam. In other action, the U.S. 40th Division lands without opposition at Panay, greeted by Filipino guerrillas who control much of the island. Only light resistance meets the American troops securing Iloilo, the Philippines' 3rd largest city. As the ragged remnants of the small Japanese garrison withdraw into the mountains, no immediate pursuit is planned. Clearing Luzon and Panay are important steps in carrying out General MacArthur's ultimate goal, attacking the Japanese home islands from secure bases and staging areas in the Philippines. But every inch of ground gained in the Pacific exacts a heavy toll on American troops, who battle fatigue and disease as well as an intractable enemy. Strategically, victory in the Philippines seems just a matter of time. But for tired GIs, the only real certainty is the long, bloody struggle that an ever more desperate enemy will require in exchange. 7 March 1945, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Above the bustle of typewriters and ringing phones, a clerk exclaims, "Hot damn! We got a bridge over the Rhine and we're crossing over." In this manner, Schaeff gets the word that the tired GIs of Major General John Leonard's 9th Armored Division have captured the Ludendorff Railway Bridge at Remagen after a daring daylight assault. In the days preceding the attack, the GI's General Omar Bradley pushed the troops of his American 12th Army Group hard toward the banks of the Rhine River. To the north, Major General William Simpson's 9th Army continued to support the plodding Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery on his drive toward the Ruhr. With the 9th thus committed, Bradley ordered General Courtney Hodges, whose 1st Army had been holding the center of the Allied advance, to swing south and link up with 3rd Army and General George Patton, who were pushing northward along the Rhine's west bank. Bradley hoped this swift pincers movement would trap the 75,000 men of the German 15th Army on the wrong side of the Rhine and force them to capitulate before they could blow the remaining bridges. For this job, Hodges would have preferred to sling the most powerful dart from his quiver, Major General Lightning Joe Collins, but Collins' 7th Corps was badly depleted by the battle to take Cologne. Instead, Hodges was forced to rely on General John Milliken, commander of the 3rd Corps. When Milliken, a hard-charging pupil of Patton's, brought up the possibility of taking a bridge over the Rhine intact, Hodges scoffed at the idea, suggesting instead that Any bridge would surely be destroyed by the Germans before U.S. forces could get anywhere near it. Undeterred, on 6 March, Milliken ordered the 9th Armored Division to proceed towards the lazy little hamlet of Stadtmeckenheim, only 8 miles from the Rhine. In a wholly unexpected turn of events, the citizens of Stadtmeckenheim greeted the Americans with white flags flying from every window. Pausing only to dine on a sumptuous meal of K-rations, the liberators of Stadtmeckenheim began clearing roadblocks and beefing up their arsenal with captured enemy equipment before setting out in haste to the next objective, Remagen. As the armored spearhead approached a bluff overlooking the mighty Rhine, an ominous silence descended over the men. In the valley before them lay the ancient Roman town of Remagen, looking deceptively peaceful in the haze. Incredibly, beyond the town they could see the intact Ludendorff Bridge, choked with retreating Nazi soldiers and materiel. After a quick battlefield conference, the small group devised a daring plan to try to take the bridge. Under cover of tank fire and with bayonets fixed, a company of GIs charged down the hill and into Remagen. The defenders, a ragtag group of 1,100 Volkssturm, had also lost their taste for war. Only a handful remained at their posts. The rest fled at the first roar of approaching armor. The remaining defenders were horrified to discover that residents of Remagen were pointing out their positions to the Yanks. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, the holdouts finally retreated across the bridge after blowing a 30-foot crater in the approaches. As the Americans advanced, the retreating enemy began frantically trying to drop the bridge. Twice, German engineers tried to set off the charges they had left in place, but without success. On the third attempt, the charges detonated, but the bridge remained intact. Emboldened by the German failure and supported by new Pershing tanks, infantrymen dashed from girder to girder across the bridge, the ricocheting shells ringing in their ears. Within minutes, they had reached the far side and secured it, albeit tenuously. In desperate need of armor support on the east bank, repair work on the bridge and the crater begin immediately. American daring has produced a miracle, a foothold across the Rhine. As word of the miracle makes its way up the chain of command, many Allied generals are incredulous. Omar Bradley is so surprised that he disturbs Eisenhower at dinner to ask if he should exploit the victory. When Ike hears the news, he scraps months of careful planning, realizing that if the foothold is to be maintained, he must throw everything he has across the icy waters. Immediately, he orders 4 divisions to reinforce the delicate bridgehead. On 8 March, 8,000 men representing elements of the 9th, 78th, and 99th Infantry Divisions and the 9th Armored Division slog across the bridge and fan out in 3 directions. They cannot help but take note of the sign that greets them. Cross the Rhine with dry feet, courtesy of the 9th Armored Division. It is of only brief comfort, however, as German artillery shells suddenly rain down near the bridge, and snipers fire upon stretcher bearers as they carry the wounded to safety. The experience only sharpens the bitterness and determination of the GIs coming across. Heavy fighting quickly develops. The Americans repel bloody attack after bloody attack as they cling to their precious foothold. Field Marshal Walter Mödel, the Führer's precious fireman, commits 3 top-of-the-line divisions against the Yanks in an attempt to reduce the Allied foothold on the east bank. All assaults prove futile as the Americans cling tenaciously to their lucky prize. As precious fuel is exhausted and ammunition spent, Mödel has no choice but to suspend the attacks. A bitter stalemate ensues as confusion now commands the German army. In desperation, the Germans throw more than 300 planes at the bridge, only to meet the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft guns and howitzers in Europe. The Luftwaffe's aging Stukas take their place beside modern Me-262 jets in futile attempts to knock out the bridge. The Germans watch helplessly as the last of their pilots are spent in useless attacks. On 15 March, with 2 pontoon bridges constructed, The Ludendorff is closed to traffic, so repairs can continue unabated. The cumulative effect of some 50,000 GI boots, the clanking of numerous tanks, and countless attempts to destroy the structure has taken its toll. On 17 March, as repairs continue, the battered bridge finally collapses and falls into the swift current of the river below. Of the 200 men on the bridge, 63 are wounded, and 28 die in the cold, unforgiving waters of the Rhine. Every Allied soldier lost will be mourned, but the price of the Ludendorff Bridge has been small compared to the inestimable number of lives saved by the doorway its taking has opened into the heart of the fatherland. The Rhine has been crossed. Now, Ike is free to set his sights on the 300,000 Nazi troops defending Germany's industrial heartland and make his plans for final victory. Your letters made the difference at mail call today. Because of your letters, Tom, Frank, Ann, and hundreds of thousands of GIs and service personnel just like them all over the world know that someone still cares, still remembers, and that there's still a world back home worth fighting for. And because you sent your letters V-mail, those little morale boosters arrived in the shortest amount of time possible. V-mail is a wartime postal system operated jointly among the Army, Navy, U.S. Post Office Department, and Signal Corps. Through V-mail, all important letters from home reach the most outlandish destinations in less than 2 weeks. Obviously, this is no ordinary postal service. V-mail is a complex method designed to process tens of millions of overseas letters each month, and to drastically reduce their weight and bulk so that they can be transported to the front or to any far-off outpost by air. It works like this. First, write your letter on special one-page V-mail stationery. Remember to stay within the margins so that your entire message will reach its destination. When you finish, fold, seal, and deposit your letter in any post office or mailbox. It's that simple. Now the magic begins. What happens to a V-mail letter once it's in the mail depends on its ultimate destination. Generally, however, your overseas letter is delivered to a Signal Corps facility that photographs it for transport. But this is no ordinary photograph. This photograph is so small that your letter and thousands of others can be put on one very small roll of film called microfilm. One roll of microfilm weighs less than 7 ounces, occupies only 16 cubic inches of space, and holds up to 1,800 letters. If the military were to ship 150,000 ordinary one-sheet letters, that cargo would weigh more than 2,500 pounds and take up a large amount of valuable space that might otherwise be used to transport supplies for the troops. On microfilm, Those same letters weigh only 45 pounds and take up much less space. This difference in size and mass means the difference between shipping by steerage or by air, the difference between your letter arriving months from now or days. The magic of email continues when your letter reaches its destination. Signal Corps stations overseas print each letter onto 4x5-inch pieces of photographic paper that are much easier for the boys to carry in a pocket or backpack than bulky paper letters are. Once printed, letters are sorted by unit and delivered each day at mail call. When Johnny writes back to you, his letter goes through the same process as yours, with one exception. Don't mind the blacked-out words in his letter. Johnny didn't change his mind about what he wanted to say. Before his letters are microfilmed, they go through a military censor who makes sure Johnny isn't giving away any military secrets. Letters from home may be the best-kept secret weapon of the war. All over the globe today, our men and women in the armed forces, from the highest-ranking general to the lowest buck private, wait for reinforcements from you. Continue to do your part for the war. A letter a day, every day, till victory. March 1945, Mandalay. This once beautiful city of golden Buddhas has been reduced to smoldering rubble after weeks of bloody street-to-street fighting. British forces had closed like a fist around Mandalay in mid-March, but the Japanese were game for one last major battle in Burma. Their snipers vanished into the shell-pocked cityscape and awaited a flood of fresh targets. The Allied attackers did not disappoint them, charging enemy positions with machine guns blazing. Like everything else in the Allied Burma campaign, it was hot, treacherous work. The polyglot force of Indian, Gurkha, and African troops would once again distinguish themselves as the backbone of the British 14th Army, known within its ranks as the Forgotten Army. Always last on the list for precious supplies and reinforcements, the 14th has tackled the hardest jobs without the necessary tools or manpower. Now these hardened troops have at last come out of the jungles and are waging war in the fashion of their better-equipped comrades in Europe. Moving behind tanks and covered by fighter planes, the British Army's first objective in Mandalay was to take Pagoda Hill. The task was assigned to a battalion of Nepalese Gurkhas, among the toughest soldiers in this or any other war. Weaned on the rugged Himalayas, the Gurkhas had to blast their way up this smaller but no less formidable obstacle, the strategic high point of Mandalay. Pagoda Hill was so named for the maze of conical structures dotting its expanse. Built to honor Buddha, the temples served a decidedly irreligious purpose for enemy sharpshooters. Particularly obstinate snipers, unreachable by infantry, were hammered by artillery, tanks, and dive bombers. After 3 days of fighting, the important vantage point was in Allied hands, and the Japanese had retreated to the confines of Fort Dufferin. General William Slim and his commanders were modern warriors faced with a medieval problem. Fort Dufferin had 26-foot high, 30-foot thick stone walls and a moat. Slim had artillery and bombs. In Mandalay, the clever tactics of deception and stealth that had kept the 14th Army alive throughout Burma had to be thrown out the window. The taking of Fort Dufferin came down to simply blowing up a wall with tons of explosives. Slim called in wave after wave of P-47 Thunderbolts, which could operate in the area with near impunity. After a week of trial and error and ear-splitting noise, the planes and artillery managed to open up a big, messy doorway. At first, it seemed Slim's men would not be able to reach that doorway, let alone cross its threshold. His infantry made 4 attempts at crossing the moat surrounding the fort, but found the well-armed Japanese to be less than receptive hosts. After one more day of bombardment, however, white flags appeared from within the fortress. The handful of shell-shocked prisoners turned out to be Burmese. The Japanese defenders had escaped through the fort's drainage system, leaving behind a smoking ruin and piles of dead bodies. Now there is nothing left to do but raise the British flag over the recaptured fort. Nearly 3 years of desperate fighting have passed since the Japanese took this colonial possession from the British, but there is little time to celebrate. Other concerns weigh heavily on the minds of Slim and his men. The Burma area army is doomed, but its remnants have slipped away into the jungles. More than 300 miles to the south, Rangoon is still occupied. Slim's imperative now is to race south along the Irrawaddy and Sitang rivers, mopping up the last vestiges of the enemy along the way. For this next mission, the Allies' worst enemy in Burma may be Burma itself. Monsoon season is about to begin, and the hope is Slim's troops can reach the sea at Rangoon before a sea of rain falls from the sky. March 1945, Berlin. Since the time of Attila the Hun, the threat of an overwhelming invasion from the east has haunted the German psyche. Now that national nightmare is coming true in the vast and savage incarnation of the Soviet army. Despite the Wehrmacht's best efforts and despite fighting on German soil, the insatiable Russian Hydra, the red beast from the east, has consumed German soldiers and civilians alike, driving always westwards. The prize the Russians seek is Berlin. But Berlin is more than just a city to them. It is a lair containing a monster that must be destroyed at all costs. And to date, that monster, Adolf Hitler, has thrown every man and weapon at his disposal into the path of the Soviet Colossus in vain attempts to stave off his now inevitable day of reckoning. Having failed to ensure victory by his generalship, and having failed to keep the Allies at arm's length by sheer will, Hitler now turns the last vestiges of his power upon the one element over which he still maintains at least a nominal control: the German people. With the Americans and British driving hard for the Elbe and the Soviets within artillery distance of his chancellery, Hitler issues a scorched earth directive ostensibly designed to deny succor to the enemy. But the territory of the Reich has been irretrievably lost since January. To order such draconian measures now, with the war all but over, confirms what many have suspected for some time. The Führer is quite mad. When confronted by his Minister of Armaments and War Production, Albert Speer, with the obvious repercussions this action will have on the German people, Hitler merely states that if indeed the war is lost, then the nation should also perish. Initially, Speer was Hitler's architect. Then his mission was to rebuild the victorious Reich in the gaudy, sterile image that his leader envisioned. Now that same leader has ordered him to be the architect of Germany's apocalypse. Speer cannot and will not be a party to such destruction. But it will take a whirlwind journey over the length and breadth of what remains of Nazi-controlled Germany to dissuade and persuade local political and military leaders to hold off instigating a national suicide. A glance at the daily situation confirms that Hitler's Reich is defending its last bastion. The German bridgehead over the Oder River at Altdam has been eliminated. Now, with the exception of a few scattered units around the Danzig area and the embattled defenders in the Courland pocket, no German soldiers are left east of the Oder. Finally, in a rare moment of lucidity, Der Führer dismisses the incompetent Heinrich Himmler from his post of commander, Army Group Vistula. As the supply trains roll day and night to Soviet forces on the Oder, it is only a matter of time before the curtain is ready to rise on the final act of the war in Europe. 21 March 1945, the Pacific, as Admiral Mark Mitcher's fast carrier force sails within 90 miles of the island of Kyushu. Experienced sailors throughout the fleet wait with taut nerves, bracing themselves for the possibility of kamikaze attacks. Each bears in mind the searing image of suicidal Japanese pilots inflamed with Bushido honor, going down in flames on the decks of American ships. Alert to the dangers surrounding them, Fifth Fleet's air and artillery support is crucial to the planned landing at Okinawa. Unlike similar assaults in the Philippines, there are no American bases within striking distance of this island, and until a base can be established on Okinawa, carriers will provide the only air cover for the fleet and its troops going ashore. American aircraft raiding Kyushu's airfields find hangars and barracks empty on the morning of 18 March. The planes they had hoped to catch napping on the ground are already laying course for Mitcher's Task Force 58. Hellcats and Corsairs pound the base anyway, hoping their own roosts will be more than smoking wreckage when they return. On this day, few kamikazes find their mark, but the fleet sustains some severe damage and numerous casualties. A kamikaze pilot with a one-way ticket to the deck of the Intrepid is cut down moments before he hits, but burning fragments tear into crewmen and ignite fires in the hangar deck. Yorktown escapes complete devastation when 2 Zeros headed for it miss their targets. A third manages to release a bomb that slams into the signal bridge and explodes below decks. Its nose bloodied, Task Force 58 licks its wounds and prepares for the next day's onslaught. The morning of the 19th, Task Force 58 takes a beating early. Just as the mess crew is preparing breakfast aboard the Wasp, a bomb penetrates the hangar deck, passes through the men's quarters, and explodes in the galley. 10 sailors are killed instantly and hundreds are wounded as able-bodied men fight to contain the fires breaking out on 5 decks. Their heroic efforts pay off. In only 15 minutes, the flames are out, and Wasp's flight deck continues air operations. Massing their attacks now, Zeros continue to swarm in the skies, releasing clusters of bombs or exploding in fiery trails as Yank gunners blast them into Emperor Hirohito's good graces. As terrifying as the kamikaze threat has become, it is the bomb that inflicts the worst damage on a carrier. Just as aircraft are preparing for a second strike in inland sea, the Franklin takes a direct hit. Its hangar deck and its forward elevator are wiped out. Minutes later, a second bomb smashes into the flight deck, spreading fires among the planes preparing to launch and destroying the aft elevator. When the conflagration reaches the stored ammunition and artillery aboard the aircraft, tremendous explosions rip the air. Ignited rockets skid down the deck toward crewmen attempting to control the fires. Soon the entire ship is engulfed in flames and black smoke, powerless and dipping its side ever closer to the turbulent surface of the sea. When all but key personnel are ordered to abandon ship, men drop into the water and wait to be rescued by nearby destroyers. Miraculously, the Franklin's captain and his skeleton crew manage to bring the fires under control, stabilize the ship's list, and transfer the wounded to the Santa Fe, which takes on over 800 men in 30 minutes. Over 700 sailors are killed aboard the Franklin and many more wounded. But these staggering casualties could have been even worse if not for the superior firefighting skills of Navy crewmen. Badly crippled, but still game, the ghost ship begins the long trip back to New York for repairs, the most heavily damaged carrier to survive the war. The success of the fast carrier raids speaks for itself. More than 3/4 of the Japanese aircraft committed to action were shot down, and unknown numbers were destroyed on the ground. This virtual annihilation of air power in the vicinity of Okinawa removes the threat of an aerial defense and gives American troops a much appreciated edge for the assault to come. When Johnny marches off to war, he may leave behind his weeping mother, his fond sister, his longing sweetheart or wife. The faces of these women linger sweetly in his memory as he stands watch on a rolling ship's deck in the Pacific, or pensively reflects on the next bomber mission. But in many cases, those gentle ladies to whom he bid farewell may not be as far behind as he thinks. They may, in fact, be as close as the steel hull of the ship on which he serves, or the riveted shell of the plane in which he flies. Women on the home front are answering their own recruitment call, pouring into the factories, shops, and service professions that keep the country running and its guns firing. Our boys overseas depend on American industry to supply them with everything from the uniforms they wear to the shells in their guns, and the gals back home are rolling them off the production lines in war-winning fashion. And if you're looking for the latest fashion trends, go no further than the nearest Boeing plant, steel mill, or Jeep assembly line. This season, smart headgear is definitely in. Bandanas, hard hats, and welders' masks meet the dual needs of function and, well, function. The modern Riveter won't be seen anywhere without the latest in denim coveralls, and steel-toed boots never seem to go out of style. Most of the wartime jobs available to women can scarcely be described as glamorous. Heat, dirt, and oil are their lot, whether it's operating heavy machines, sifting gunpowder, or welding sheet metal. Working side by side with men, these plucky patriots punch their cards at the steel mills and the shipyards, sharing the labor as well as the hazards. Thousands of industrial deaths occur each year, and many more thousands are permanently disabled. Women face health risks posed by handling chemicals and explosives. Sometimes they receive very little or no training for their new jobs. But determined to be as brave as their counterparts on the front lines, you won't find much complaining on the assembly line. When the whistle blows, the day's work is not necessarily done. There are still families to feed, clothes to wash, and homes to clean. Many women pull double duty of this kind, their normal chores made even more tedious by waiting in long ration lines for meat, sugar, coffee, gas, and shoes. Nevertheless, such difficulties and privations are largely taken in stride. Experiencing life outside of the home and immediate family for perhaps the first time, these women discover a special kind of camaraderie with their fellow workers who come from many different backgrounds. They feel satisfaction from a job well done and pride at its completion. And unlike the long hours of toil put in at home, this work is rewarded with a paycheck. So Johnny, wherever your duty may take you, remember that the gals back home are doing their part to beat Hitler and Hirohito too. In your letters home, show your appreciation by writing those 5 little words that mean so much. Mom, thanks for the tank. 26 March 1945, Iwo Jima, obedient to the Bushido Warriors Code, the last vestige of Japanese resistance, determined to earn the respect and esteem of emperor and ancestors by fighting to the death on the northeastern edge of this blood-soaked chunk of sulfurous rock. Dug deep into the side of Kitana Point, a few hundred of the Rising Sun's best, including their commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, continue to nip away at the occupying Americans who already have achieved their strategic objective. Navy Seabees are busily repairing and extending the runway on Iwo for their new function as a way station and repair yard for Air Corps B-29 superfortresses engaged in bombing runs over the Japanese home islands. When complete, the main runway will reach nearly 10,000 feet, longer than the island is wide at some points. Although the Marines who have fought on this sulfur-smelling rock will never think of a box of matches the same way again, Iwo is a gift for Allied strategists. Less than 700 miles from downtown Tokyo, it affords the mighty bombers' escorts a mere 3-hour flight to their targets. This is a far cry from the 10 or more hour journey separating Japan and the next nearest airbase in the Marianas. That Iwo should be both a godsend and a singularly god-forsaken slice of hell is a crowning irony in a war in which irony is common currency. At this stage of the fighting, divisional designations have become more or less irrelevant except in terms of marching orders. Few of the personnel on the island were here when the invasion started 5 weeks ago. Of the 30,000 Leathernecks who landed on Iwo on 19 February, 2/3 are dead or wounded. The collections of weary infantry and support troops answering to the names 3rd and 5th Marine Divisions have the thankless task of flushing out Kuribayashi's remaining tired and hungry defenders. The word firefight describes the action quite literally. Gallon upon gallon of flamethrower oil is spent on the Japanese resistance as hapless soldiers are cremated in their bunkers. Others watch helplessly as explosive charges are detonated at point-blank range. Even so, the Marines must proceed carefully. The wounded and the desperate often wrap themselves in dynamite awaiting the arrival of unlucky Marines, a final honorable gesture for emperor and country. With their defeat sealed, on 26 March, the remaining Japanese emerged from their hiding places for a final, futile counterattack. For many of the Americans, it is the first time they have seen their nemesis alive since the assault began, if only briefly. It is also the first opportunity for the Allies to reap a significant bounty of prisoners. Kuribayashi is not among them, nor is his body found. The Axis commander is said to have committed suicide after being wounded in the anticlimactic final battle. Even now, however, the need for caution remains. There almost certainly are stragglers within the honeycomb of tunnels on Iwo. It will be necessary for the Yanks to keep a watchful eye for many more weeks. Iwo Jima is now firmly in American hands, but at a terrible price. 6,821 servicemen have given their lives, and 19,000 more have been wounded in the name of strategic necessity. Of the 24 battalion commanders to lead troops into battle on that fateful day in February, 19 are casualties of war. 3 full assault divisions of the elite Marine Force were reduced to but a shadow of their former strength. No battle in Marine Corps history has ever been so costly. Admiral Chester Nimitz told the assembled troops on 17 March, "Among the Americans who served on Iwo Island, uncommon valor was a common virtue." March 1945, Oppenheim, Germany. With Allied forces poised to cross the Rhine, the war in Western Europe now enters a new phase: Armageddon. Through the ages, the swiftly flowing Rhine has served Germany well as the natural barrier to foreign invaders. but now it is little more than a starting line for the sprint to Berlin. To the south, General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group hopes to make a series of quick crossings, taking the enemy by surprise. To the north, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is ready to unleash Operation Plunder, the biggest Allied mobilization of men and materiel since D-Day. The two operations mirror the personalities of their commanders. Montgomery is the master of the grand set-piece assault, preferring to paint in broad, deadly strokes. Bradley is a shy, expedient general, content to capitalize on enemy mistakes. Since the disastrous Battle of the Bulge, in which Monty crowed about fixing Bradley's blunders, the two men have been fierce rivals. Bradley need not attempt to match Monty's egotistical flourishes, however. His bombastic subordinate, General George S. Patton, easily fills that role. Aware that Montgomery's boats will hit the water on 23 March, Patton tells his division commanders they can cross the Rhine anytime they want, as long as it's now. Boats and engineering equipment are hustled from depots in the rear, and General Leroy Irwin's 5th Division is tapped to lead the assault. As the 90th Division begins phony preparations for a major crossing at Mainz, the 5th sneaks across the Rhine upstream at Oppenheim. Neither the lack of planning nor the feeble German resistance hinders the operation. Regardless of the real motivations behind Patton's early crossing, its most immediate effect is to catch the enemy with his pants down. The German 7th Army, depleted from the fighting west of the river, has barely had time to assess its own strength before the Americans start pouring over the Rhine. There are little more than handheld weapons available to repel the Third Army, and the hands holding them are often too young, too old, or too infirm to make effective use of them. The first waves of American assault boats quickly give way to amphibious vehicles loaded with reinforcements. The 5th Division's bridgehead soon extends for miles, and Bradley begins shouting from the rooftops and to the press that Patton has managed to sneak across the river. Just as news of the surprise assault comes to light, Montgomery's Operation Plunder starts with a bang. The 21st Army Group conjures a hellstorm of artillery fire at several points along the river. By the time the first assault boats land on the east bank of the Rhine near Wesel, the German defenders have been pummeled into near submission. Monty has incredible might at his disposal, a force of well over 1 million men and hundreds of thousands of tons of equipment. In addition to British and Canadian forces, the American 9th Army also participates in the assault, bringing the total number of Allied divisions to 29. Montgomery leaves nothing to chance. After overplaying his hand in Operation Market Garden the previous October, the British Field Marshal is now playing his cards close to his chest. Despite the high probability of simply rolling over the thin German resistance, Operation Plunder has an insurance policy in the airborne Operation Varsity. Instead of deploying paratroops before the assault, Monty waits until the first waves of the main force get across the river, then drops 2 airborne divisions just behind enemy lines. The paratroopers make a harrowing descent through the flak-filled skies, only to find themselves in the enemy's crosshairs when they land. Despite heavy losses, the airborne troops succeed in destroying much of the German artillery and take 3,500 prisoners. Winston Churchill, on hand to witness the crossing, is invigorated by the rousing success of Operation Plunder. "The German is whipped. We've got him. He is all through," Churchill tells Eisenhower as they watch their countrymen swarm across the Rhine. The Prime Minister even convinces Monty to take him to the east bank of the river shortly after it is secured. Patton discovers his son-in-law may be in a POW camp some 35 miles behind enemy lines. Despite the risk, Patton sends a task force into Hammelburg on 26 March to liberate the camp. The mission of mercy quickly becomes a fiasco as tanks from the 4th Armored Division are cut off and torn to shreds. Most of the troops sent to rescue POWs become prisoners themselves. Patton soon hangs the blame on just about everybody involved in the raid, except himself. Bradley and Ike allow Patton's folly to blow over, however, and keep the world's attention focused on the rousing success of the Rhine crossings. The end game is at hand, and they will need all their best commanders, impetuous or otherwise, to drive a stake into the heart of the Third Reich. March 1945, Karama Islands. At dawn, amphibious tractors bearing the 77th Division litter the beaches of 8 tiny islands off the coast of Okinawa, with orders to plant Old Glory on each one and make it stick. Offshore, the USS Arkansas provides a covering bombardment in expectation of the usual Japanese welcoming committee. Fortune appears to have smiled on the GIs, however. Opposition is only token, and the most difficult chore for most of the Americans is dealing with the terrified civilian population. Perhaps the Japanese know this mini-invasion is only a prelude. The Yanks have their sights set on the shiny jewel of Okinawa, a mere 350 miles from the Japanese mainland and the first of the Emperor's possessions to fall into real jeopardy. Vice Admiral Kelly Turner wants the Karama's deep-water anchorage for refueling and resupply of his Okinawa invasion fleet. In a bit of high-level horse trading, Turner got Admiral Raymond Spruance and Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner to accede to his Karama's plan by agreeing to attack Okinawa from the north, rather than at its southern beach. Turner's bargain pays off. Immediately, supply craft begin shuttling ammunition and supplies to the big boats in the anchorage's calm. The Americans get an unexpected bonus when they find more than 350 of the enemy's fragile suicide boats hidden away in caves along the shoreline. Apparently, the Japanese were too busy digging holes to consider that the Allies might look here. At its conception, the aim of the invasion of Okinawa, codenamed Operation Iceberg, really was twofold. Apart from the obvious intent of acquiring a staging area from which to mount an invasion of Japan itself, the mission also would sever the vital supply route from Borneo, Sumatra, and Burma for the fuel-starved and sputtering empire. The Yankees assemble a formidable naval force. Spruance's Fifth Fleet includes more than 400 assault ships and nearly 1,100 support vessels, many of which have been on the job since mid-February, pummeling Okinawa with the explosive calling cards of the advancing Allies. Carrier-based planes also have been performing reconnaissance on Okinawa's defenses as they sought their targets. Spruance, Turner, and Buckner intend to leave as little as possible to chance. Unfortunately, most of the aerial photography has produced inconclusive pictures. Constant cloud cover obscures the southern half of the island, where both the Japanese army and local conscripts are thought to be digging the now familiar reinforced entrenchments. The invasion force will have to play a large part of this tune by ear. What's more, Admiral Chester Nimitz has agreed to undertake the invasion with only the forces already available to him: 3 Marine and 4 Army divisions. The Marines have been training at Guadalcanal, enduring nearly as much misery from heat and insects as from the exercises themselves. The Army units have just returned from their first R&R in over 3 months, but no one begrudges them their brief respite. Their last assignment was the fetid expanse of Leyte. Noticeably absent is any vestige of support from the Japanese homeland. Task Force 58 under Mark Mitcher is adding to its reputation as a quick, mobile engine of destruction as it batters the enemy airfields on Kyushu, rendering Admiral Matome Ogaki's 5th Air Fleet mostly theoretical. Since Japanese naval power has likewise been reduced to a few choruses of thanks for the memories, the waters near the potential landing sites have been mined. Crews work gingerly to remove the barriers, mostly without incident. On 31 March, just hours before L Day, the 77th adds one more item to the shopping cart: Tiny Kaisushima, Worthless to the Japanese, but a useful prize for the Americans, lies between the Karamas and Okinawa's southern end and will serve as a home for a 155mm long Tom cannon installation. From here, island defenses can be targeted during what stands to be the most difficult part of the mission. Along with the Navy, the 77th has done its job. Tomorrow, Easter Sunday, American soldiers will storm the beaches of Okinawa, hoping that this time next year, they'll be hunting Easter eggs and chocolate bunnies, instead of desperate and dangerous Japanese troops. March 1945, Japan. American bombers in the Pacific dealt the rising Sun Empire a terrible blow this month, destroying large parts of 4 major cities on the Japanese home island, killing thousands. In 5 raids, Major General Curtis LeMay's 21st Bomber Command has destroyed almost 32 square miles of Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya, terrorizing the civilian populations. The Japanese' worst fears about the vulnerability of their cities have come true in the wake of 10 days of non-stop incendiary bombings. LeMay's successful campaign is another milestone in the short history of the Army Air Corps. It is perhaps the greatest victory since the nation's fledgling air branch finally flew off on its own. In Europe, American bombers fell under the control of Army commanders who used them primarily in support of ground troops. In the first half of 1944, American B-17s and B-24s spent much of their time on bombing missions designed to mislead the Germans about the site of the coming Allied invasion. After D-Day, as Allied ground forces pushed across France, bombers played a mostly subordinate role. From President Roosevelt and Congress on down, Americans opposed the concept of their planes carrying out unprovoked, promiscuous, or indiscriminate attacks against another nation's citizenry. So while the Luftwaffe and the RAF had for a time bombed each other's cities with varying degrees of success, the U.S. Army Air Corps confined itself to what it called precision bombing. Always done in daylight, precision bombing targeted the German industrial web in an effort to destroy key elements of Germany's war manufacturing capabilities. Targets were chosen for their critical products or roles, and for how hard it would be for the Germans to replace them. Unfortunately, the Americans discovered that precision bombing was not particularly effective, nor was it all that precise. The Germans always seemed to recover from the repeated bombings of their transportation, oil, and aircraft manufacturing facilities. By August 1944, the Americans began to rethink their bombing policies. Eisenhower told 8th Air Force Commander Major General Carl Spaatz that, "While I have always insisted that the U.S. strategic air forces be directed against precision targets, I am always prepared to take part in anything that gives real promise to ending the war quickly." Still, the Americans resisted British proposals for terror bombing of German civilians. Instead, they rededicated themselves to striking hard at strategic targets, especially German oil production and transportation. These attacks in the fall of 1944 were more systematic and more effective, and they began to shut down the extraordinary German war machine. In February, the Americans joined the British in bombing the German city of Dresden, killing, by some estimates, more than 100,000 civilians. Public outcry failed to persuade American leaders to back away from their new bombing policy. The attack on Dresden was perhaps a prelude to the strategic bombing of Japan. General LeMay, whose 21st Bomber Command is part of the uniquely independent 20th Air Force, answers only to the Chief of the Army Air Corps, General Henry Hap Arnold. LeMay is a veteran of the B-17 campaigns against the Germans, as well as precision strikes against Japanese factories in the Far East. LeMay's B-29 superfortresses are capable of flying longer distances and carrying heavier bomb loads. And now he has loosed them on Japanese cities built of wood and paper, targets much more vulnerable than the fortified German cities. Each time LeMay's bombers make a run on the Japanese home islands, they leave fire and devastation in their wake. Some of Japan's more important cities are reduced to smoke and ash. Now, LeMay has begun to believe that one of the founding fathers of the American Air Forces, General Billy Mitchell, was correct in his belief that wars can be won by extensive bombing of an enemy's key cities and civilian populations. With this month's raids, the Army Air Corps has proved the power of the strategic air arm. Now, for the first time, LeMay hopes, Eisenhower and his staff can see how a war, this war, might be won through bombing alone.